March 5th, 1953. Moscow. The most feared man in the Soviet Union is dead. Joseph Stalin's body lies in the Hall of Columns while a nation is ordered to mourn. His children, Vasily and Svetlana, watch from the shadows of the stage. What becomes of the son who wore a general's uniform but lacked his father's discipline? What path does the daughter, his little sparrow, choose when the gilded cage door finally opens? How do you live when your name is a synonym for terror for nearly 30 years? Joseph Stalin commanded a vast empire through paranoia and bloodshed. His cult of personality built on the bones of millions. His death created a power vacuum that shook the world. But for his two surviving children, it was the end of a private world defined by fear and privilege. Their lives after his death would show the true, inescapable price of that legacy. The first to fall was the son. Vasily Stalin was a lieutenant general in the Soviet Air Force at the age of 28, a promotion born of his name, not his talent. He commanded the Air Force of the Moscow Military District, a position of immense power. He lived a life of reckless privilege, surrounded by sycophants, funded by the state. He drank heavily and sponsored the National Air Force ice hockey team, VVS Moscow, treating it as his personal property. On January 7th, 1950, a plane carrying 11 players of the VVS team crashed near Sverdlovsk, killing everyone on board. Fearing his father's apocalyptic wrath, Vasily covered up the disaster. He found replacement players from other teams, and within 24 hours, VVS Moscow played its next scheduled game as if nothing had happened. Joseph Stalin never found out. At his father's funeral, Vasily was drunk, shouting that his father had been poisoned by the men now standing in power: Beria, Malenkov, Khrushchev. It was a fatal miscalculation. Less than 2 months later, on April 28, 1953, the new leadership acted. Vasily was arrested by a team of MGB officers while on a fishing trip outside Moscow. The charge was criminal negligence, but the real crime was being Stalin's son in a post-Stalin world. He was stripped of his rank and his honors. During his interrogation at the Lefortovo prison, he confessed to everything: embezzlement, anti-Soviet propaganda, abuse of power. He was sentenced to 8 years of hard labor. He was sent to Vladimir Central Prison, a fortress of stone and silence 120 miles east of Moscow. To the state, prisoner number 247 was not Vasily Stalin. He was Vasily Pavlovich Vasilyev, a name meant to erase him. His health deteriorated rapidly. He suffered from stomach ulcers and heart disease. He wrote desperate, coded letters to Khrushchev, pleading for his release. He served almost the entire term. He was released early, on January 11th, 1960, a broken man. The freedom lasted 106 days. On April 29th, 1960, he was arrested again after visiting the Chinese embassy in Moscow, where he allegedly made inflammatory statements denouncing the Soviet leadership. The Kremlin had had enough. There would be no second chances. If you value documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Now back to the story. Vasily was exiled, not to Siberia, but to the closed city of Kazan, 500 miles from Moscow. He was given a small 2-room apartment on Gagarin Street and a meager pension. He lived under constant KGB surveillance. He married for a final time to a nurse named Maria Shevergina and took her last name, but later reverted to Jugashvili, the name his father was born with. It was a last, desperate attempt to reclaim an identity. It did not work. On March 19th, 1962, just 2 days before his 41st birthday, Vasily Stalin died. The official cause was chronic alcoholism. His final years were a blur of paranoia and drink, a man haunted by a name he could neither live up to nor escape. He was buried in Kazan's Arsko Cemetery, a world away from the Kremlin's red walls. His sister, Svetlana, chose a different path. Not a slow fall, but a sudden flight. She was Joseph Stalin's little sparrow, the cherished daughter whose mother, Nadezhda Alliluyeva, had committed suicide in 1932 when Svetlana was just 6 years old. Her life was a contradiction. She lived in the heart of Soviet power, but her personal life was under her father's brutal control. He had her first love, a filmmaker named Alexei Kapler, sentenced to 10 years in a labor camp. He refused to even meet her first husband, a fellow Moscow State University student named Grigory Morozov. Her second marriage to Yuri Zhdanov, the son of Politburo member Andrei Zhdanov, was politically arranged. After her father's death, she worked in Moscow as a lecturer and translator, living quietly, trying to build a life out of the wreckage. She kept her mother's maiden name, Alliluyeva. In 1966, she fell in love with an Indian communist, Brajesh Singh. When he died in Moscow that year, she received a rare permission from Premier Alexei Kosygin to take his ashes back to his family in India. It was a trip that would change her life and embarrass the Soviet state. On March 6, 1967, toward her last day in India, Svetlana Alliluyeva walked away from her Soviet minders. She took a taxi to the United States Embassy in New Delhi, carrying a small suitcase containing a manuscript and about $1,500. She declared her intention to defect. The CIA station chief, Robert Rale, was stunned. The request went all the way to the White House. The defection was codenamed Operation Accomplice. She was flown secretly from India to Rome, then to Geneva. In April 1967, she landed in New York City, a ghost from another world walking into the full glare of the Cold War press. She held a press conference where she denounced her father's regime and the Soviet system. That same year, she published her memoir, 20 Letters to a Friend. It was serialized in Life magazine and The Observer, and its publication was timed to coincide with the 50th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. It became a global bestseller, earning her more than $2.5 million. She was, for a time, the most famous defector in the world. But freedom was not simple. She changed her name to Lana Peters after marrying an American architect, William Wesley Peters, a chief architect at Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin Fellowship. They had a daughter, Olga. They lived on a sprawling estate in Wisconsin. But the marriage fell apart after only 3 years, and she lost a significant portion of her fortune in the divorce and in bad investments with the fellowship. Svetlana struggled to adapt. She was haunted by the children she had left behind in Russia, a son named Yosef and a daughter named Yekaterina. She moved constantly, from Princeton or New Jersey to California to the United Kingdom. In 1984, in a shocking reversal, she returned to the Soviet Union with her daughter Olga. The Soviet government restored her citizenship. It was a propaganda victory for Moscow, but she found she no longer belonged there, either. Her adult children, who had been forced to denounce her, gave her a cold reception. After clashing with her family and the authorities, she returned to the United States just over a year later. She spent her final years in obscurity, living in a nursing home in Richland Center, Wisconsin. Svetlana Alliluyeva, the daughter of Joseph Stalin, died of colon cancer on November 22, 2011. She was 85 years old. There was another son, the one Stalin disowned. Yakov Djugashvili, Stalin's eldest child from his first marriage, had a tortured relationship with his father from the beginning. In the late 1920s, after Stalin forbade his marriage to a young woman named Zoya, Yakov shot himself in the chest. He survived. Stalin's only comment was, "He can't even shoot straight." Yakov eventually became a Red Army senior lieutenant, a battery commander in the 14th Howitzer Artillery Regiment of the 14th Tank Division. In the first weeks of the German invasion, in July 1941, he was captured near Smolensk. The Germans knew exactly who they had. His capture was a major propaganda tool. They dropped thousands of leaflets over Soviet lines, showing Yakov in their custody, sometimes with a letter from him urging surrender. They broadcast his voice over loudspeakers on the front lines, trying to demoralize Soviet troops. After the German defeat at Stalingrad, Berlin made an extraordinary offer to Moscow. They would trade Yakov for Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, the highest-ranking German officer ever captured. Stalin's reply was delivered through the Swedish Red Cross. It was short and brutal. "I will not trade a marshal for a lieutenant." He abandoned his son to his fate. On April 14, 1943, Yakov died in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. German records claim he committed suicide by running into an electrified fence. Other witnesses said a guard named Konrad Harfich shot him after he refused an order. For Stalin, his son was just another casualty of a war that would consume 27 million Soviet lives. The fall of a dictator ensnares more than his own blood. It also consumes the families of his enforcers. Lavrenti Beria was Stalin's most feared secret police chief, the architect of mass arrests and executions. His son, Sergei Beria, was not a policeman, but a brilliant scientist. He held a doctorate in engineering and worked at the top-secret Design Bureau No. 1, a lead designer on the Kometa cruise missile system, a weapon intended to destroy American aircraft carriers. His life was one of extreme privilege, shielded by his father's terrifying power. That shield shattered 3 months after Stalin's death. On June 26, 1953, Lavrenti Beria was arrested by his former colleagues in a Kremlin coup. That very same day, military trucks surrounded Sergei's home. He and his mother, Nina, were taken into custody. While his father was tried in secret and executed in the basement of the Lubyanka, Sergei was held in Lefortovo and Butyrka prisons. He was kept in solitary confinement and used as leverage against his father. He was never charged with the same crimes as his father. Instead, he was stripped of his academic titles. his doctorate, his Stalin Prize, and his name. He was exiled to Sverdlovsk, a city in the Ural Mountains closed to foreigners. He was given a new identity, Sergei Alexeyevich Gegechkori, for 10 years. He worked as a junior engineer in a design bureau. His past erased, his every move watched. His talents, however, were undeniable. Despite his background, he eventually became a chief designer in the secret institutes where he worked. He was a ghost in the Soviet military-industrial complex, a brilliant mind the state could neither trust nor afford to waste. Only decades later, during the era of glasnost, was he able to return to Moscow. He spent his final years trying to clear his father's name, publishing a book that portrayed Lavrenti Beria as a reformer. Sergei Beria died in Kyiv in October of 2000, his life defined by a legacy he did not choose but could never outrun. Not all the children of the Kremlin elite were cast out. Artyom Sergeyev was Stalin's adopted son. His father, Fyodor Sergeyev, a close friend of Stalin's, died in a train crash in 1921. Stalin raised the infant Artyom in his own household alongside Vasily and Svetlana. Artyom chose the military, but unlike Vasily, he earned his rank. He graduated from the Frunze Military Academy and became a respected officer in the Red Army, fighting through the entire war and rising to the rank of Major General of Artillery. When Stalin died, Artyom's life did not collapse. He was a professional soldier, not a political liability. He navigated the treacherous currents of the post-Stalin power struggle by remaining loyal to the military, not to any single politician. He was one of the founders of the Soviet Union's anti-aircraft missile forces, a crucial part of its Cold War arsenal. For decades, he remained silent about the man who raised him. Only in 2006, 2 years before his death, did he publish a memoir, Conversations about Stalin, offering a rare, personal glimpse into the dictator's private world. He died in 2008 at the age of 86. He was buried in Moscow's Kuntsevo Cemetery with full military honors. He survived because he was useful. Decades later, a different kind of decay took hold in the Kremlin. The children of Leonid Brezhnev, who ruled from 1964 to 1982, experienced a rot, not of terror, but of corruption and excess. His daughter, Galina Brezhneva, became a symbol of the era's stagnation. She was the Soviet Union's original wild child, a socialite known for her public drunkenness, her numerous affairs, and her love of diamonds. At 18, she ran off and married a circus strongman. Later, she married the illusionist Igor Kio. The marriage lasted only 9 days before KGB agents arrived and took her passport, annulling the union on her father's orders. Her most infamous affair, with a performer named Boris Beryatsa, known as Boris the Gypsy, became tangled with a vast smuggling and bribery ring. The investigation, known as the Diamond Case, implicated the director of Gastronome No. 1, Moscow's main food emporium. He was eventually executed. While her father was alive, Galina was untouchable. His power was her protection. That protection vanished on November 10th, 1982, the day Leonid Brezhnev died. His successor, the former KGB chief Yuri Andropov, immediately launched a sweeping anti-corruption campaign. Galina and her circle were the primary targets. Boris the Gypsy was arrested and sentenced to 7 years in prison. Dozens of others were swept up in the investigation. Galina herself was questioned multiple times. She was never charged with a crime, but she was placed under a form of house arrest. Her public life over, she lost access to her dacha, her foreign travel, and the special stores for the elite. She fell deeper into alcoholism. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, she was a relic of a disgraced era. She sold off her father's awards and state gifts to survive. Her own daughter, Victoria, eventually had her committed to a psychiatric hospital to treat her chronic alcoholism. Galina Brezhneva, once the princess of the Soviet elite, died there alone in June 1998. She was 69 years old. Her funeral was small, attended by just a few relatives. The fates of these children diverged wildly. One died in drunken exile, another in anonymous poverty in a foreign land. One vanished into a German concentration camp, another was erased and remade by the state he once served. One thrived as a loyal soldier. Another drowned in scandal and vodka. They inherited names that were keys to a kingdom and then, overnight, became marks of Cain. After his death in 1962, Vasily Stalin's body was moved several times. In 2002, his remains were reburied next to his last wife in a cemetery in Moscow. A quiet end for a turbulent life, Svetlana Alliluyeva, or Lana Peters, left specific instructions after her death in Wisconsin in 2011. Her body was cremated. There would be no grave, no monument, no place for pilgrims or protesters to gather. In 1999, nearly 50 years after he was imprisoned, the Military Collegium of the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation reviewed the case of Vasily Stalin. They vacated his conviction posthumously. He was cleared of all charges and fully rehabilitated. A piece of paper declared him innocent. The shadow of a father can be a long one. For the children of the Kremlin, it stretched across continents and decades, and for some, it never disappeared at all.